Hi. So today's video is going to cover William Shakespeare, the Renaissance, and you're reading for Twelfth Night. So let's get into some William Shakespeare. So before we really talk about William Shakespeare and the Twelfth Night, we need to talk a little bit about the Renaissance. So we need to talk about some ideas related to the Renaissance that kind of help shape how society perceived Shakespeare and those like him. So the Renaissance is one of the greatest periods of literature in all of history, just because so much of society was changing, and what was being deemed acceptable is different from what was acceptable previously. So it allowed for a lot more creative license because the world doesn't revolve around the church as much anymore as it had in the past. So it gave authors a lot more freedom to write about more things. So some of the best authors of this time, or the most notable authors of this time, include, of course, William Shakespeare. But we also have authors like Christopher Marlowe, Miguel Cervantes, and then Paradise Lost was written by John Milton, which was a pretty famous piece of writing at the time. So what makes these authors so special is the characters that they're writing. That's the main difference between writing before the Renaissance and then writing coming out of the Renaissance. The characters that are being written are so much more realistic than they ever had been before. If you think about Chaucer that we read last week, or the week before rather, and the Pilgrims on their way to Canterbury, they fit into one little mold that had to do with religion. They were either religious or they were not religious, and there wasn't really any leeway in between. Think about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and how the characters in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight had to abide by this code of chivalry, and outside of that code, those characters were nothing. They had no purpose outside of that code of chivalry. So in Renaissance writing, characters started to be more realistic. So a couple of things that you may notice, or that readers of Renaissance writing notices, is that characters seem to be baffled by their places in the world. It no longer is acceptable to be born poor and just accept that you're poor, or be born rich and be born noble and just accept that you're noble. Characters challenge the status quo. They struggle against that. If a character is born in under certain circumstances, then that doesn't predetermine their life. There is a way for characters to change their situations and to raise themselves out of bad situations. They aren't predestined to be whatever it is they were born into. Which leads us to number 3 on the screen. This struggling against the status quo often looks like they are rebelling against society. If society says that, a woman only has one place in the family, then anytime a woman steps out of that place in the family and kind of challenges that idea, it looks a lot like rebellion. So we see characters that are struggling with the way that the world works. They want to change the way that the world works, and when they try to step out against the way that the world works, they are looked at as maybe rebels. And then life is a lot less obvious. It's a lot less dictated. Before the Renaissance, even in real life, people had one purpose, and that was to serve whoever was above them. Clergymen did nothing in their lives but serve their God. Vassals did nothing in their life but serve their lords, or thanes served their lords. So there was a lot less who am I as a human being in this big world kind of mentality before the Renaissance. Well, after this shift in thinking through the Renaissance, now we have characters and then people who are a lot less sure about life and their place in it. And so there's a lot of self-discovery that's happening with characters at this time. Renaissance, I'm sure you already know this, but we'll review. Renaissance is a French term that means rebirth. So we are literally, during the Renaissance, being reborn. Society is being reborn. It is becoming completely new. So the arts are renewing literature of the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks and the achievements of that time. They are reviving those old stories, and they're making those old stories fit the new world. So they do this through using the same structure and form as some of the ancient texts used, but the characters, like I said before, the characters are new and are more symbolic, more representative, rather, of the changing society as opposed to the old society. Another way that the Renaissance authors are still holding on to that tradition, but then revamping it to fit the new world, is that they contain references to that old Renaissance workings. All of those old texts, they reference those things so that readers who are a little less likely to change their ways still see the old world in this Renaissance type writing. So it's changed enough for it to represent how the world is changing, but it's not so different that people who still hold on to the old ways don't recognize it. So what the Renaissance writing kind of instilled then with these characters that are so lifelike, so realistic, is this idea of humanism. So humanism is kind of where we go beyond just reading the classic literature, and we're looking at something that represents humanity in and of itself. So humanists rediscovered writings about science and government and rhetoric and art and philosophy and all of these big things that make us a well-rounded individual, and instead of just focusing on religious texts or only people who were rich or in the church were intelligent enough to read. Humanism kind of leveled the playing field. There's this idea that if you were human, you had the right to understand humanity. And so we see a lot more humanism involved in Renaissance works as well. So let's talk about humanism a little bit, because it was almost a political shift in Renaissance society. So we have church, and you see this on the right side of the screen. So the church wanted influence in politics and in secular life. Really, the church wanted power over most everything. The church believed that an accumulation of wealth was bad. People should not be rich. Education, for those who followed the church, education should be limited. Only a certain type of person should have education, and those people should be either in power because God ordained kings and queens, so only kings and queens should be educated, or those who were part of the church should be educated. And those who followed that strict church guideline believed that moral and ethical behavior was decided by Scripture. So instead of just you being a good person, your moral behavior was dictated by what the Bible said. But through the Renaissance, we have this political change, and so then we went, instead of those following the church very strictly, we have this group of people who were humanists who believed very different things. So I have the points kind of lined up side by side on your screen. So the church wanted power over secular life, but humanists thought that the church shouldn't rule in civil matters. So things like government. The church didn't belong with the government. So humanists fought against the church being separate from the government. Humanists believed that wealth was good, and it allowed people to do noble deeds. That you can't spread the wealth if you don't have the wealth. So people who had money, according to the humanist view, people who had more money had more opportunity to do good in the world. Humanists believe that everyone should have a well-rounded education. Everyone should learn to read. Everyone should learn about the Bible, but everyone should also learn about math and science and politics. And so this humanist idea through the Renaissance is kind of what helped form what school looks like today in regards to that well-rounded idea where we take classes in multiple different subjects so that we have a well-rounded education. Humanists also believed that moral and ethical issues were secular, not spiritual, which means that you are a human being and you get to decide if you are a good person or a bad person. And it has very little to do with the actual Bible itself and everything to do with you and what kind of person you want to be. So through the Renaissance, we have this idea of humanism unfolding in society. And then now we're going to kind of squeeze down and get more focused on Shakespeare himself. In Elizabethan culture, so Queen Elizabeth is in charge right now, we have the Globe Theater. Now, the reason that I put the Globe Theater here is because it is reminiscent of what society looks like at the time. So we have a picture of the actual Globe Theater here, and you can go visit parts of it today. But you have the thatched roof at the top. And then you see in the shade areas, we have these seats, and that's where people with money would sit. They would sit in seats to watch the performance. So you have the stage right way over here to the left side of the screen, and then you have this pit right here in the front. And so those who weren't wealthy could still come watch the performances. Now, this is a humanist kind of idea too, because if we were not following that humanistic kind of idea, those who didn't have money to see the show wouldn't see the show. But that humanist idea, everyone deserved a chance to experience things. Those who didn't have a lot of money were still invited to the show, but they were not allowed to sit in seats, so they were called groundlings. So the groundlings would stand right here on the ground in front of the stage. So, there is a social hierarchy here at the Globe Theater if, Elizabethan citizens wanted to come watch a performance at the Globe. So that gives us that leads us to some Renaissance ideas specific to Shakespeare. Okay, so the humanistic kind of view and what Renaissance means, that's kind of across the board, across literature, everywhere. But specific to Shakespeare, we have three big Renaissance ideas that I want you to kind of hold on to as you're reading Twelfth Night. And one of those is nature. And this idea that nature can reflect what happens in the lives of humans. So often this is represented in the terms of weather. If there is a terrible bad storm, then that storm is kind of symbolic of the emotion that is happening inside of a person, as a bad decision, or a big decision rather, is coming up. That turmoil that we feel inside of us is represented in literature like a bad storm. So we have this idea of nature that Shakespeare kind of plays around with. We also have this argument between reason versus passion. So in the Renaissance, there's this kind of idea that people are playing with. Is it better to be a person who is guided by reason or by passion? So is it better to think with your head or to think with your heart? I think that there are positives and negatives to both sides of that argument, but we see kind of what happens when reason and passion war with each other in most of Shakespeare's plays. Most everybody reads Romeo and Juliet in the 9th grade, and I think it's fair to say that Romeo and Juliet and Tybalt and Mercutio, they all act on passion rather than reason. So they act before they think. If Romeo had taken 5 more seconds at the end of the play to think about what he was doing, then maybe he and Juliet both would have survived. So we've got this idea that, when is it better to be guided by reason and when is it better to be guided by passion? And then specific to Shakespeare himself, we have this idea of the great chain of being. Now, I'm going to explain the great chain of being here in a second, but I've also posted a video on Blackboard that I want you to watch because it goes into the great chain of being in a little more detail. But in Shakespeare, he uses this great chain of being, and this is kind of a societal concept as well. So it's a hierarchy of everything, from plants, from the dirt and the rocks in the ground all the way up to the heavens. And the idea is if any of these links in the chain of being are broken, then the whole chain kind of falls apart. So if you put, for example, animals above angels, then you have broken the chain of being and your whole world kind of falls apart because of it. So we have this idea here that God is at the top of the chain. He's first. And then we have angels. So those are God's like messengers. So they are next in the chain of being. And then just under angels we have royalty. Because at the time we believed that God handpicks kings and queens. So royalty is right under heavenly beings. And then under royalty we have the clergy, because the clergy chooses to serve God. They are not picked by God. So we have the clergy. And then underneath the clergy we have people, regular old people. And then we have animals, and then we have plants, and then beneath plants are all non-living things like rocks and dirt and things like that. Now, it's important to note that inside the chain of being are other kind of hierarchies. So, like with royalty, kings are always going to be higher on the chain than queens. Princes, always going to be higher on the chain than princesses. Men are always going to be higher than women. Sons will be higher on the chain than wives. So if you have a family, a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter, when you look at the great chain of being, the hierarchy would be all of the men in age order and then all of the women in age order. So it would be the father, then the oldest son, then the next oldest son, then the mother, then the oldest daughter, and then the next oldest daughter. So if you're the youngest daughter in your family, you are literally at the bottom of the chain. The reason that the Renaissance society kind of looked at this great chain of being is because it was supposed to help control unruly emotions. If everyone kind of used this chain as a way to get permission to do things, or as a way to maintain your role in society, then they believed that what would happen was that you would be more likely to be guided by reason and less likely to act on emotion. Because if we act on emotion, then chaos will ensue. The chain will be broken, and then everything will kind of be destroyed. So we use this great chain of being to kind of create this idea that there is a hierarchy, there's a chain of commands that everybody should follow. So that's kind of what the Renaissance is in a very small, very quick nutshell. So this is going to lead us into a discussion about Twelfth Night. Now, before we get into Twelfth Night specifically, it's important for you to know that Twelfth Night is a comedy. In fact, it's like the OG rom-com. It is one of the first romantic comedies that have ever been really kind of written and accepted in society. So let's talk a little bit about comedy first, and then we'll get into Twelfth Night specifically. All right, so Aristotle, ancient Greek philosopher, talked about emotion a lot in his writings. And according to Aristotle, comedy is an imitation of inferior people. Now, that doesn't mean that characters in comedies are inferior. A comedy is a play that depicts some kind of laughable error, a disgrace or some mistake that elicits an emotion in the audience. It could be delight. It could be embarrassment. The audience could have secondary embarrassment because they're embarrassed for the characters. But it offers some kind of emotion for the audience. Now, this emotion, Aristotle termed catharsis. It was cathartic to see these productions on stage. So, what is catharsis? Well, catharsis is usually a term that we talk about when we talk about tragedy, but it has some comedic elements as well. It arouses solemn emotion. Tragedies don't leave their audience in a state of depression. So if you go see a sad movie, you're not going to be depressed when you leave that movie. Aristotle argued that a function of plays, tragedy and comedy both, are to arouse unhealthy emotions in the human being. And through performances on stage, humans could cleanse those unhealthy emotions. And cleansing those emotions made for a healthier person. So, Greek drama was not considered entertainment just for entertainment's sake. It had a communal function, a healthy function. So, having tragedies on stage and having comedies on stage contributed to the good health of the community. A tragedy would teach men how they should act. Comedies would teach men how they should not act. So we see in a lot of religious festivals and community celebrations in ancient Greek, we had dramatic performances on stage as part of those festivals. Not because it was entertainment, but because it was a form of cleansing of the soul, so to speak. And that leads us to Twelfth Night. So just a fun fact to know and tell. Shakespeare wrote Twelfth Night, and it is the only play Shakespeare wrote that has an alternate title. So it's Twelfth Night, or What You Will is the name of the play. So how is it a comedy? Well, there's a female protagonist who's disguising herself as a young man. It's giving me some Mulan vibes. She's a girl, and she wants some things in life, and the only way she can have these things is to not be a girl, so she dresses up like a boy to get the things that she wants out of life. Now, the reason that this is so funny is because in Shakespeare's day, all of the parts were played on stage by men. So, the actor playing Viola, who's the main female lead, would be a man pretending to be a woman who is pretending to be a man. So that would have been very amusing to the audience at the time. So let's talk about Twelfth Night, not the play, but the actual day of Twelfth Night. So, originally, Christmas was celebrated a little differently. Today, when we celebrate the Christmas season, we start at Thanksgiving, and we kind of celebrate up to Christmas Day, and Christmas Day is that's the big day of the Christmas holiday. Well, that's not how it used to be. Christmas used to be the first day of Christmas celebrations, and then the 12th night was the 12th night after Christmas. So when you sing the song the 12 Days of Christmas, the 12 Days of Christmas actually start on Christmas Day, not the 12 days before Christmas. So in the Elizabethan era, the 12th night would have been somewhere around January 6th. Okay? This day is also known as the Epiphany, or the Feast of the Magi, which is the day that the wise men visited baby Jesus and presented him with the 3 gifts. So it's interesting to think. that we celebrate Christmas kind of backwards now, because in the past, Christmas was the first day of the season, and then the wise men visited baby Jesus afterwards, and with the Epiphany and all of that. It's also happening at the same time the Feast of Fools and the Lord of Misrule is happening, so let's talk about that for just a second. The Feast of Fools is a holiday celebrated as a festival where everything is kind of turned upside down, which is kind of a theme of Twelfth Night. You know, we've got the girl dressed as the boy, a peasant wants to be noble. At the Feast of Fools, there would be a dessert served, and desserts would be served first because everything is swapped. And there would be a bean hidden in one of the desserts. And whoever found the bean, and it was usually a pauper or a peasant, would find the bean, and then that peasant would become the ruler or the royal leader of the festival. So kings would then become peasants, and then that peasant would become royal for the festival. So what does this kind of look like in our world today? Like, how do we see Twelfth Night in some of our more recent history? George Washington, actually, our first president, never discusses Christmas in much detail or with much enthusiasm in his journals, and we have a lot of George Washington's journals. So he never talks about Christmas with a lot of gusto. He talks about, regular business dealings on Christmas Day. But on Twelfth Night, so around January 6th, he gives much detail about big extravagant parties and festivals that he went to. He and his wife Martha Washington were married on Twelfth Night, so their anniversary was on the Twelfth Night. And then her recipe for the feast, the Twelfth Night feast cake, is actually still on display in Mount Vernon. So Mount Vernon is, it used to be a museum where you could tour George Washington's home, but it has since been turned into a restaurant, and you can see her original recipe for Twelfth Night cake in this restaurant. So it called for 40 eggs, 4 pounds of sugar, and 5 pounds of dried fruit. So that's a lot of cake. The Twelfth Night is also the beginning of Carnival. So if you're familiar with Mobile, is where Mardi Gras began in America, but New Orleans kind of made it what it is today. Twelfth Night Twelfth Night is the beginning of Carnival. So in Creole society, celebrating the opening night of Carnival happens with a king cake. So at the Feast of Fools, the person who finds the bean in their dessert is the ruler of the festival. Well, in the Creole society, whoever finds the bean or the baby in the king cake hosts the next carnival ball. And then Carnival ends on Mardi Gras. So Mardi Gras is French for Fat Tuesday, so that is the last day of the Carnival season. Now, Carnival is happening at the same time an old pagan holiday is happening called Saturnalia. And then as time went by, Saturnalia became the medieval Feast of Fools, which was a celebration of fun and disguises and pranks. So Christmas and Twelfth Night and Mardi Gras and the pagan Feast of Fools all kind of come together in this particular story. So specifically about Twelfth Night, the play. Its setting is the city of Illyria. This city was known to Shakespeare as an actual region off the coast of the Adriatic Sea. So it's across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. So this is Italy right here. And then this is the Adriatic Sea. So we have Illyria. I know that my slide says present-day Albania, but Albania is more to the south down here. Really, Illyria would have been more like present-day Croatia, is right in here. But Illyria is the perfect place for a setting like this, for this story, because it was kind of generically exotic. So we have a play here that's full of romance and intrigue and everybody knew about Illyria, but they really hadn't been to Illyria. So it was mysterious enough, but still familiar. And because Illyria is situated off the coast, it was, excuse me, it was a perfect situation to create like shipwreck scenes. And then Illyria would have been associated with piracy in the Elizabethan mind, so we've got kind of that mystery aspect as well. And then Illyria, the name itself, gives us this preconceived notion of illusion. So if there is the whole city is Illyria, which kind of represents illusion, and then all of the things that are happening in the story are an illusion, and the 12th night happens at the Feast of Fools, and the Feast of Fools is where everything is turned upside down, then everywhere we look in this story there is an illusion happening. So some themes that we see throughout this play is this idea of illusion to get what we want, deception and disguise and madness, but there's also love involved and the extraordinary things that a person will do in the name of love. So keep that in mind. If you're reading through 12th Night and you're like, this doesn't make sense, or this is not what it seems, you're right, it's not what it seems. Because Shakespeare is trying to create this world of deception. A couple of things that I want you to be aware of that Shakespeare uses specifically in this play is situational comedy and dramatic irony. So situational comedy, or sitcom, is a series of outrageous events that are meant to make you laugh. It's supposed to be funny. If you're reading through it and it's not amusing at all, reread it, because the situations that the characters find themselves in, they're ridiculous and they're funny. The characters are forced to deal with really strange situations and challenges. They have challenges to who they are as people, challenges in their relationships, and through all of these challenges, there's this lighthearted tone. Dramatic irony is also used. So dramatic irony is where the characters in the story have no idea what's going on, but the audience, or the readers, we do know what's going on. So think about a horror movie. In every horror movie that you've ever seen, the girl that gets killed first, everybody knows that if the girl goes downstairs in the basement because she just heard a strange noise, everybody knows, hey girl, the killer is in the basement, you're about to get gone. Everybody knows that. And sometimes we're screaming at the TV, don't go in the basement, don't go in the basement, you're gonna get killed, don't go in the basement. But the story has to go on. Now, does the character know that the bad guy's in the basement? No. She's going down there to see what the strange noise was. But we, as the audience, we know what's happening. That's dramatic irony. So, as you're reading the 12th Night, keep in mind that even though we, as the readers, know what's happening and we know what's going on, the characters may not know what's going on. Okay? So let's review some of these characters really quickly. 12th Night was created into a movie, so you can rent 12th Night the movie. So you may recognize some of these actors. Viola is the main character. She is a young aristocratic woman. She wants to disguise herself as a man to get a job because she's involved in a shipwreck. And then we have Olivia. Olivia is a beautiful woman. She is wealthy, and she is in mourning because her dad and her brother have both passed away. We have Duke, Orsino, and Malvolio. So the Duke is very handsome. He is in love with Olivia. He loves love. He's just awesome in all ways. And then we have Malvolio, who is Olivia's head servant. And he is snobby and self-righteous, but he is also in love with Olivia. So we have both of these men who are in love with Olivia, who is in mourning because her father and her brother are dead. And then we have Sebastian, and we have Antonio. So Sebastian is Viola's twin brother, and everyone thinks that Sebastian has died. Everyone, even Viola, thinks that her twin brother died in the shipwreck. Antonio rescues Sebastian and is extremely fond of him. Okay? And then we have Sir Toby and Sir Andrew. So Sir Toby is, he's a loud drunk. He's Olivia's uncle. He's not the greatest human being that you want to spend your time with, but he's fun. And then we have Sir Andrew, who is Sir Toby's friend. He thinks he's awesome, but he's really not. But he wants to date Olivia. So now we have two men who are in love with Olivia, and then this other guy that wants to date Olivia. So Olivia is a hot commodity in the 12th Night. And then we have Maria, Olivia's servant. She's clever and daring, maybe a little snide and snarky. She's the character that everyone loves to hate in most everything that she plays in. And then we have Feste, who is the court jester of Olivia's household, and he's very wise. So he kind of is the opposite of what we would expect. He is an embodiment of this world turning upside down, because the court jester is supposed to be the fool. He's supposed to be the idiot that doesn't know what he's doing and is just there for people to laugh at. But in reality, this court jester is very wise and offers very sound advice to the characters. So that is our cast of characters. Here we have them all lined up next to each other. Viola, keep in mind, Viola is disguising herself as a man. So her male name is Cesario. So Cesario and Viola are the same person. All right? So that is kind of all I have. I've talked your ears off about Renaissance and Shakespeare. So your job now is to read Twelfth Night. It's one of the shortest plays that Shakespeare produced or wrote. Take the quiz on Twelfth Night and review the study guide, because Twelfth Night will be on your final exam at the end of the semester. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. I will answer anything you have. See you later.